Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction. So, in my role, normally in a normal year, I'd spend a good majority of my time working on wonderful, exciting things like PPO plans and HMO plans that the rest of my family and friends don't understand how I get excited about that stuff. But for the past year, 2 years, I've been working almost solely on healthcare reform and healthcare reform implementation. As many of you know, the Kaiser Family Foundation is a nonprofit foundation dedicated to education and research around healthcare and healthcare reform topics. That is a separate entity from Kaiser Permanente, but we work closely with them on a regular basis around research and education from a national perspective. And just this week, the Kaiser Family Foundation has released their 2013 Employer Research Survey. They do this annually that gauges and measures employer perceptions and issues related to healthcare and healthcare reform topics. And so I'm going to be sharing some of that information with you today. As I often get asked when I have these discussions around healthcare reform and what employers are concerned about in relation to healthcare reform, many of them say, I just can't wait to get to January 1st, 2014 and be done with this all. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the end. That will be probably just in the middle of a lot of different changes, both for our industry and for employers like you, that will have many changes coming to your health benefits and your health benefit packages. Most of what I'm going to cover today is all available online, and I'll share some resources available to you around that topic. Much like the law itself, there's way more information included in here than I can get through in the next 20 minutes or so. So I'm just going to touch on a couple key points that I think might be useful for you as you consider your options and how to prepare for 2014 and going forward. And then if there's more information wanted or desired, I have a couple of resources you can go to that I'll cover at the end that can really help you get to the bottom of kind of what employers are thinking about. As I mentioned before, the Employer Research Survey that Kaiser Family Foundation sponsors every year takes about 3,000 employers across the country. And these are employers that have a minimum of at least 3 employees, surveys them on a number of different healthcare and healthcare reform topics, and then shares that information for the use of education and informing employers across the nation. I'm going to touch on a couple key facts. These are nationwide facts and not specific to North Dakota or the Fargo area, but I think they can be applied in many different geographies and situations. As Senator Heitkamp mentioned earlier on, one of the major issues facing this country right now is the escalating cost of healthcare and the healthcare cost burden on our gross domestic product. As she mentioned, it's currently about 18%, and it's escalating very rapidly. This just is a picture of the premium cost increases year over year across the country for all employers. As you can see, they've been growing steadily. There is some good news buried underneath this data, and that is the premium increases on a single individual premium for 2013 averaged about 5%. That's significantly lower than it's been for the past decade. The normal trend has been running about 8% for the past 14 years and about 10 to 12% from 2000 to 2010. So it is mitigating somewhat over the past 2 years. A lot of different factors may play into that, but there is some mitigation over the past 2 years. Unfortunately, as the next slide demonstrates, even at 5%, that far outpaces the consumer price index, inflation, and other price indices, and is not sustainable at 5% itself. One of the things that I often get challenged by employers that we work with is we love what Kaiser's doing, we love what you're doing around quality and reducing costs. You have to get your healthcare trends down to CPI or lower. That's something that this industry hasn't accomplished for as long as I can remember, but it is a challenge I think that's been readily put in front of us, is we have to get our premium trend increases year over year down to under 3%, and that's a challenge that is substantial, but it's something we're very serious about. As you can see, the other interesting factor here, and it really plays out on the next slide as well, is the percentage of the premiums that is borne by the employees themselves through premium contribution. Traditionally, if you look at the previous 20 years, most of the premium increases year over year were borne by the employer, and they were carrying the majority of those premium increases directly to their bottom line. Over the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen this shift where employers are now putting more of that cost increase burden on the employees themselves. So just over the past 10 years, you can see that all the total premium increases equated to about 80%. The premium percentage that's borne by employees through their contribution has gone up 89%. So more and more of that is being passed on to employees themselves. As you probably know firsthand and can guess, this is getting employees more involved in their health care, plans, their healthcare choices, and what options they have for healthcare going forward. An interesting note is just around the difference between small group and large group premiums themselves, and who's bearing the cost and what type of coverage they're including. So this is a complicated slide, but it basically shows between small group employer groups and large employer groups the amount of premium costs both for individual coverage and family coverage, and then what portion of that cost is borne by the employees versus the employer. And the real differential here is if you look at the base premiums for an individual, there really isn't that substantial of a difference between small employer groups and large employer groups. But from a worker contribution standpoint, you see that much more contribution is borne by employees in small employer groups than large employer groups. This is a trend that we've seen across the country, is that small employers tend to pass more of the family contribution responsibility onto the employees themselves. In fact, we've seen a lot of smaller employers eliminate coverage for family coverage altogether. So talking about public exchanges and how public exchanges will change the marketplace over the next couple of years, there's three models that you've probably seen from a national basis. The first is the state-based exchanges. These exchanges are the exchanges that are run completely and solely by the state. They handle all the administration, as well as the eligibility determination and verification. There are state-federal partnership exchanges, where the state handles and operates most of the plan and the qualified health plan management functions, but the federal government handles most of the plan administration functions. And then finally, the federally facilitated exchange model, which North Dakota is very familiar with. If you look at how states are implementing this across the country, at least for 2014, you see that North Dakota is not alone. The majority of states are going with the federally facilitated marketplaces, where the federal government is actually managing the administration of the exchange as well as the eligibility determination. There are a number of states where the states are taking on full responsibility for that administration. As you can guess, taking on that administration comes a lot with financial burden and challenges to get that up and implemented for 2014. And then a handful of states are doing the partnership model, where they're splitting responsibilities. This is actually data that we partnered with eHealth around to get feedback directly from small group employers in what their thinking is and what their concerns are around the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And I just stole a couple data points from this that might be helpful for you. I think more than anything, it shows that you're not alone, because you're probably thinking and feeling some of these same pressures. So the first question was around confidence that they can explain or understand the health insurance exchange marketplaces. As you can see, about 2/3 of the small group employers felt that they were not confident in understanding and explaining the health exchange marketplaces and how it would work for them for 2014. And a very small percentage actually felt confident in how this is going to work for 2014. When they think about healthcare reform law and how it's going to impact their rates and their prices going forward, again, almost 60% felt that this would drive costs up over the near term and create a more expensive marketplace and premiums for them and their employees, with a very small percentage feeling that it would actually control costs or mitigate costs going down. In terms of grandfathering status, and Mike spent some time talking about grandfathering and what the implications of grandfathering are going into 2014. When the bill was first signed back in 2010, our initial assumptions were that a very small percentage would actually be able to maintain grandfathering status going into 2014, primarily because in order to maintain grandfather status, you're very limited in the types of plan changes you can make year over year. With the increasing cost, most employers use plan and benefit changes year over year to address the cost of premium as they go up. As you can see playing out, if you look at those workers that are actually covered in a grandfathered plan for 2013, across all segments, it's just over 1/3 of the population is still in a grandfathered plan. Now, it's a little higher for small employer groups that have been able to maintain grandfather status and lower for large employer groups. But our expectations 3 years ago were about 1/3 would be able to maintain grandfather status going into 2014, and that's playing out. And many of the employers that we talk to simply feel that the cost benefits of changing plan design and being able to shift costs over time outweigh the benefits of being able to avoid some of the Reform Act requirements around grandfather status. One of the items that we all know passed in 2010 was the inclusion of health coverage under family plans up to age 26. If you look back or remember back in the premium increases in 2011, there actually was a blip in the rates that premium went up in 2011, and that was primarily driven because of additional coverage for dependents under their family plans. This has driven a lot of additional coverage into plans for dependents. And this just gives a quick snapshot of those additional coverage individuals that are now under family plans because of the extension of benefits up until age 26. The last couple slides really start to get into consumer and employer preferences or impacts and opinions around the Healthcare Reform Act and what's coming through. On this slide, we took a look at the percentage of all firms offering health benefits. As you can guess, one of the concerns around the Affordable Care Act changes is that employers would drop coverage and stop offering coverage through their employee benefit plan or their employer benefit plans. This information we track year over year to see the percentage of firms continuing to offer coverage through employees. And this, as you can see, has been trending downward somewhat over the last couple of years as some employers have chosen to leave the marketplace. This is a little misleading, so I do want to caveat that. Because of the heavy weighting of the number of small employer groups in this survey, the trend downward on employer-sponsored coverage is primarily driven by small employers exiting the employer-based coverage market. If we look at large employers, so employers with 200 or more employees, that percentage has stayed relatively stable, about 99%. So almost all large employers continue to offer coverage to their employee population. When we look at smaller employers, we're seeing more and more smaller employers exit the marketplace and stop offering employer coverage to their employee population. The last couple slides really get to our employer tracking study, and again, as from a Kaiser standpoint, we try not to influence or provide any perspective on what our personal preferences or feelings are around the law itself and the changes in the marketplace, but these are simply employee or consumer preferences and consumer responses to specific questions around how they're feeling or what their concerns are around the Affordable Care Act itself. What you'll see here is the views of the law itself and consumer views of the law itself as whether or not they see the law as favorable, unfavorable, or neutral, or don't know how that impacts them going into 2014. So if you take a look at this over time, there's been some movement over time, but if you go back to the original signing of the law in 2010, there was predominantly a slightly favorable opinion from consumers' point of view around the law itself and how it would impact them. And that percentage has dropped significantly over the past 3 years. If you look at those that had an unfavorable view of how the law would impact them, that's relatively stayed stable and unchanged as we've gone through the past couple of years. And one of the interesting notes that we've taken from this tracking survey is just since the presidential election, that there's been a substantial decrease in those that see this as a favorable impact to them going into 2014. Along the same lines, we followed through and asked consumers, what they felt that was driving that unfavorable or favorable view of the Affordable Care Act itself. And many felt that when they were polled on and felt that that was an unfavorable position around the Affordable Care Act, that the law goes too far in impacting their healthcare and healthcare choices, whereas as a very small percentage actually felt that the law didn't go far enough in impacting changes for themselves. Another perspective that we have in our monthly tracking survey is those that expect a personal impact from the Affordable Care Act going into 2014. So these are individuals that expect that the law itself will impact them personally and how they buy and get health insurance coverage. If you go back to 2010, when the bill was signed, the points of view in terms of feeling that this would make them better off in terms of how they get coverage and access health care versus those that felt that they would be worse off in how they get access to health care was about the same, 32 and 31% respectively. If you track that over the past 3 years, those that feel that they'll be better off from implementation of this law has dropped down to 19%, so a significant drop off as compared to those that feel that they'll be the worse off from the impacts of the Healthcare Reform Act relatively stayed flat. So we've seen that drop off in those that feel that this will actually make them better or give them a better advantage when it comes to accessing healthcare and healthcare costs. So like I said, a lot of information packed in a very short period of time. I'd love to go into more detail, and there actually is a fairly robust survey, but unfortunately we don't have the time to go into that. I will stick around afterwards for any questions, but I do want to reference you to a few sources of information that may be beneficial as you consider what your options are for 2014. First and foremost, Kaiser Permanente, we have our own healthcare reform location, much like Blue Cross Blue Shield in North Dakota. A lot of information that we keep generic to a national focus, and so we make that available to all employers out in the marketplace. The Kaiser Family Foundation is a very robust and very significant source of information. I'd highly recommend that of all the sources up here. That's Kaiser Family Foundation, or kff.org. They have many different resources on there that help educate and inform both on the impacts of the reform law as well as how employers are addressing the reform changes going into 2014. There's a handful of other sites that I won't go through, but you can see that they are very helpful and beneficial in helping employers understand the changes that are coming and how to implement those changes effectively. And I'll be able to answer any additional questions or concerns that you might have afterwards if there's any questions on that. So with that, Paul, I think I'll turn it back to you.